When a girl is treated as merchandise, something inside her dies long before her innocence is stolen. My name is Teresa, but everyone on the internet knows me as Grandma Teresa. I'm 68 years old, sitting here on my porch in Bakersfield, California, with a chipped mug of coffee and 2 butter cookies on a plate while the cicadas sing in the old maple tree behind me. My knees ache in the cool morning air, and my hands tremble a little as I type this. But today I've decided to tell you the story that has lived locked inside me for over 5 decades. I know some of you are already shifting in your chairs. You can feel it, can't you? That edge of dread in my voice. I'm asking you before we dive in to click the like button to subscribe, and to tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Knowing I'm not alone gives me strength to keep speaking. Because what I'm about to share isn't a bedtime story. It's a wound. And like all wounds, it still bleeds when touched. Let me take you back to 1955 before I even existed. My mother, Irene, was only 18 then, a girl herself, in love with a construction worker named Anthony. They planned to marry. They dreamed of a little white house. She told me he had a shy smile and the kindest eyes she'd ever seen. Then one day on the job a scaffold gave way. He fell 3 stories and never made it to the hospital alive. My mother was 5 months pregnant with me when she got the news. She tried to be strong, but I've seen the photo of her from that time. A thin young woman staring at the camera as if she'd been hollowed out. She had no education, no job, and no family able to help except her father, my grandfather Gerald. He offered her a room in his house on the edge of Sacramento. At the time it felt like a blessing. Only later did I understand it was the opening act of a nightmare. I was born in January of 1956 in that same house, delivered by a midwife, a healthy baby with green eyes like my father's. My mother called me her miracle. We lived in the converted back room, my mother doing laundry, cleaning houses, selling candy at the school gates to scrape together enough for food. Grandpa Gerald was a hard man, a former soldier, a widower with strict rules. In those early years he wasn't affectionate, but he wasn't cruel either. He was simply absent, a shadow moving through the hallways. Things began to shift when I turned 7. I remember him pausing on the porch to watch me as I played with my rag doll. "This girl's getting too pretty for our own good," he muttered once to my mother. I didn't understand what he meant. Today I do. Today I know he was already measuring me, calculating me the way a butcher weighs a cut of meat. At school I was the quiet one, the girl who always seemed to be observing. My teacher said I was bright but shy. The truth is that even then something about male figures set off a silent alarm inside me. Maybe it was the way Grandpa's eyes followed teenage girls walking down the street. Maybe it was just the hole left by the father I never knew. By the time I was 10, I'd begun to help my mother with her work. I washed small clothes, swept the yard, sold cookies door to door. I noticed how Grandpa's gaze lingered on girls older than me. Once when he caught me watching him watch them, he said, "Women are like fruit, Teresa. You have to pick them at the right time, not too green, not too ripe." I didn't know what he meant, but the words crawled into my skin and stayed there. Our finances were always on the edge. My mother's hands cracked from soap, her back bent from scrubbing floors. At night I'd hear her muffled sobs in our little room and pretend to be asleep. Each sob left a tiny scar in my heart. She also began avoiding Grandpa, slipping out early, returning late, always tired, always anxious. Even as a child I sensed her unease but couldn't name it. Then when I was 12 the bottom dropped out. My mother fell ill with pneumonia. Bedridden for almost 2 months. With no work there was no money. Grandpa's pension barely covered medicine. That was when I saw him at the gate speaking to a heavy-set man in a suit, a big car idling at the curb. They glanced at me more than once during their hushed conversation. The man smiled, a smile that made me retreat into the house. "Who was that?" I asked Grandpa later. "A friend who can solve our problems," he said. "He's interested in getting to know you better." Those words lodged in my mind like splinters. I didn't yet understand, but my instincts screamed. My mother slowly recovered, but our debts had doubled. The landlord threatened eviction. Pharmacies refused more credit. That's when one warm May night, I overheard the conversation that split my childhood in two. "She's still too young, Dad," my mother whispered, her voice shaking. "Not young at all," Grandpa replied. "She's almost a woman. And Dr. Augustus offered a lot of money. Money we need, Irene." But she's my daughter, my mother pleaded. And what good is being your daughter if you both end up on the street? The doctor won't hurt her. He just wants her to carry a child his wife can't have. She's strong, healthy, beautiful. It's a service like any other. Silence. Then my mother's voice choked with tears. All right. But I don't want to know the details. And I don't want to be here when it happens. I crept back to bed, my heart hammering. I prayed I had misunderstood. I hadn't. 3 days later, my mother announced she'd spend the weekend at a friend's house. It was the first time she left me alone with Grandpa. She couldn't meet my eyes. Be a good girl, Teresa, was all she said. That evening, Grandpa came into my room and tossed a dress onto the bed. A light blue dress, simple but the prettiest I had ever seen. Put this on, he ordered. Wash your hair properly. Dr. Augustus is coming to dinner tonight. In that instant, I understood there was no escape. My fate had been signed without my consent. I bathed, put on the dress that hung loose across my still flat chest, and sat on the edge of the bed, my heart thudding so loud I could hear it in my ears. At 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Dr. Augustus arrived with a bottle of wine for Grandpa and a box of chocolates for me. During dinner, which Grandpa had ordered from a restaurant, something we'd never done, the man's eyes devoured me. She's perfect, Mr. Gerald, he said. Never any illness? Healthy as a horse, Grandpa replied, like a salesman showing off livestock. I kept my eyes on my plate. Dr. Augustus reached out, lifted my chin and smiled. You don't need to be afraid, girl. I'll take good care of you. When our child is born, you'll have helped your family for a long time. His hand burned my skin. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with cigarettes turned my stomach. Grandpa suddenly announced he needed to go buy cigarettes. He never smoked. The signal. As soon as the door clicked shut, Dr. Augustus moved closer, his heavy hand landing on my knee. Your grandfather explained everything, he said. You'll carry my child since my wife can't. It's an honor. We're paying well. I tried to pull away. He gripped my arm harder. It won't hurt much, he whispered, voice dropping to a threat. And you'd better cooperate. Your grandfather's already got half the money. If you don't, he'll be in trouble. Looking into the eyes of that man who planned to use my body as if it were merchandise, I felt something inside me begin to die. The dreamy girl who still believed in fairy tales. The child who hoped her mother would protect her. What happened that night was the first of many horrors. When Grandpa returned hours later, I was curled up in the corner of the room, the blue dress torn and stained, crying silently. He just looked at me, turned on the lamp, and said words that would haunt me for decades. Get used to it, girl. From now on, this is your function in the family. That was the moment my nightmare truly began. The morning after that first night, I felt like a stranger inside my own skin. My body ached, my chest was raw with silent sobs, and when Grandpa brought in a steaming mug of bitter tea, I couldn't lift my eyes to meet his. Drink this, he said curtly. What is it? My voice trembled. Herbs, he answered. Good for a woman after. Make sure the seed takes. That's when it sank in. I was no longer his granddaughter. I was a field to be plowed and harvested for money. 2 days later, my mother returned. She walked past me without a word, her eyes red from crying. When we finally crossed paths in the kitchen, I tried to speak, to release the scream lodged in my chest. She lifted her hand. Don't say anything, Teresa. What's done is done. For the first time in my life, I felt fury toward her. It burned in my veins, hot and dizzying, mixed with the pathetic hope that she might still change her mind, still protect me. But by the afternoon, when I saw her at the grocery store buying real food, meat, cheese, fresh vegetables, things we had never afforded before, I realized the truth. The price of my innocence was keeping us alive. I was 12 years old. From that night on, I lived in a state of constant dread. Every time the gate creaked open, my stomach turned. Every time Grandpa's eyes lingered on me, I knew he was calculating, planning, selling pieces of my future without my consent. School became the only place where I could pretend to be a child again. I clung to those hours as if they were oxygen. One afternoon, my teacher, Mrs. Cynthia, caught me staring out the window. Teresa, you seem different lately. Did something happen at home? She asked gently. My throat ached with the truth I wanted to shout. But then Grandpa's warning echoed in my head. If you tell anyone, they'll take you to the orphanage. And there, girl, it's much worse than here. I'm just tired, I whispered. Helping my mom a lot. It was a lie. And it sealed my prison walls a little tighter. A month after the first night, Dr. Augustus returned. And then others came. Not all at once, Grandpa was too shrewd for that. But here and there, older men, all respectable in town, all with wives who couldn't have children. They saw me not as a girl but as a service. A vessel. Commodity. At 13 my period was late. Grandpa celebrated like it was Christmas. It worked on the first try, he bragged to my mother, who only nodded and looked away. I placed my hand on my flat belly, confused, terrified, yet strangely protective. There was a life inside me, conceived in violence, yes, but innocent. A life that belonged to me, if only for a short while. Dr. Augustus was notified. And the next day he arrived with his wife, Claire. She was thin, elegant, and her perfume filled the whole room. She smiled at me with tight lips. You're going to give us the greatest gift, she said. But remember, it's not your child. It's ours. You're just the gardener who tends the seed. Her words sliced me open. The months that followed blurred into one long humiliation. My belly swelled, my school books were taken away, and I was confined to the house. Vitamins, food, even maternity clothes were provided, but not out of care. I was an investment, a prize hen to be fattened for the perfect egg. Every 2 weeks, Augustus would come to examine me. He measured my belly, pressed his cold stethoscope against my skin, listened for the baby's heartbeat. Those moments made me want to crawl out of my body. My mother changed too. With money flowing in, she reduced her cleaning jobs, bought new dresses, styled her hair. She even laughed again sometimes, as though her daughter's captivity could be forgotten if the pantry was full and the rent was paid. You're giving this family a better life, she told me one afternoon when I cried. One day you'll understand we did what was necessary. But I didn't understand. And I never would. The birth came on a stormy night in my 13th year. The midwife was brisk and cold, paid by Augustus to deliver discreetly. Pain ripped through me in waves, my young body stretched and torn. And then suddenly, the sound of my baby's cry filled the room. A boy. My boy. I want to hold him. I pleaded, reaching out. He's not yours, the midwife snapped, wrapping him in a blue blanket and handing him straight to Claire, who beamed as if she had given birth herself. I lay back, tears soaking my pillow, listening to the cries of my son fade as they carried him away. His name, I learned later, was Peter Augustus. My baby. Their baby. The next day Augustus returned with an envelope of money and a satisfied smile. He patted my head like I was livestock. Excellent work, he said. I had 2 weeks to recover before Grandpa announced another client, a coffee farmer from the north. I screamed that my body wasn't ready, that I still bled, that I still ached. He sneered. Time is money, girl. And this farmer pays double. So at 14 I was pregnant again. Between the ages of 13 and 18, I bore 5 children. 5 pieces of my soul ripped away before I could memorize their faces. To the outside world, I was a strange, sickly girl who often disappeared to relatives in the country. To myself, I was a prisoner, a reproductive slave in my own family's house. My mother had moved into her own home by then, bought with the money from my womb. She visited sometimes, always well-dressed, bringing perfumes or pretty dresses I could never wear long. Once, swollen with my 4th child, I asked her through tears, "Why don't you help me escape?" She looked away. Escape to where, Teresa? With what money? People talk, your grandfather has connections. Important people are involved. If you speak, they'll bury you. Better to accept it. That day something snapped inside me. I realized I wasn't just Grandpa's victim. I was trapped in a whole system that allowed powerful men to buy a child's body and silenced anyone who dared question. By the time I was 19, I had given birth to 6 children. My body was covered in silver stretch marks, my spirit fraying. A midwife warned Grandpa, "This girl needs rest or she won't be able to carry again." He relented, giving me a year without pregnancy, the longest reprieve I'd ever had. During that fragile year I met Jeanette, an older woman who sold herbs and helped with births. She visited often, her gnarled hands gentle as she tended my broken body. One afternoon, while rubbing ointment on my scars, she whispered, "What they're doing to you isn't right, girl. It's against God's law and man's." I clutched her hand. "Help me escape." She shook her head. "Your grandfather has the sheriff in his pocket. I've seen others try and end worse. But I can teach you small things. Ways to protect yourself." From her, I learned about herbs that could delay fertility, giving me slivers of control. It wasn't freedom, but it was something. A crack of light in the wall of my prison. By 20, I was already a mother to 7 children I never got to raise. I began secretly writing their names, dates, and scraps of memory on torn bits of paper, hiding them under a floorboard. It was all I had to keep them alive in my heart. And then came the birth of my 10th child at 23. A labor so bloody and brutal I nearly died. The doctor told Grandpa my womb was ruined, that I couldn't carry again. For me, it was both a tragedy and a twisted kind of freedom. My body was broken, but so was my value to them. And as I lay in bed, weak but alive, I wondered, what would they do with me now? When the doctor told my grandfather I could never carry another child, the room fell silent. I was 23, my body broken after birthing 10 babies, and my spirit hanging on by threads. For a moment I thought Grandpa would rage, maybe even strike me for failing the family business. But instead he just stared, his jaw tight, and walked out without a word. I lay there, blood still drying on my thighs, and felt a strange sense of dread. If I wasn't useful anymore, what purpose did I serve? The answer came days later. "You'll start helping around the house again," Grandpa said flatly, his eyes cold. "Cooking, cleaning, sewing. You're still part of this family. And you'll keep your mouth shut, girl. Don't think for one second that you're free." Free. The word almost made me laugh. I couldn't remember what freedom tasted like anymore. But something inside me was shifting. With every child torn from me, pieces of myself had died. Yet in that death, a seed of anger grew. And anger, unlike fear, doesn't stay quiet forever. The months after my last baby were filled with silence. I spent long days scrubbing floors, mending clothes, cooking for Grandpa as if I were his servant. My body felt older than my years. Aching hips, a weakened womb, stretch marks that mapped every violation of my youth. My mother came by less often. She was busy with her clothing shop now, traveling to San Francisco to buy fabric, laughing with customers, living the life she had bought with my suffering. On one visit, she dropped off a pair of shoes I could never wear outside because I was still forbidden to leave the property. "You should be grateful, Teresa," she told me. "You've given this family more than anyone. One day, you'll see we did what we had to do." Her words scraped against my bones. I wanted to scream. I am not a martyr. I am not your sacrifice. But I stayed silent, because silence had been beaten into me since I was 12. Still inside something boiled. I wasn't completely alone. Jeanette, the herb woman, still visited occasionally. One afternoon, while she pressed a poultice against my aching belly, she whispered, "You need to think of yourself now, child. No more children. No more men. Just you." "I don't know how," I admitted, my voice shaking. "I don't even know who I am anymore." She cupped my face, her wrinkled eyes glistening. "Then you find out. You start small. A step at a time." That night I made a decision. I pulled up the loose floorboard and looked at my hidden scraps of paper. 10 babies. 10 names, dates, little drawings I'd made of their imagined faces. My heart broke anew, but alongside the grief was determination. If I couldn't have them, at least I would never let the world forget them. I began writing longer notes. What their fathers did, the deals Grandpa made, the way their mothers looked at me with contempt or false gratitude. I wasn't educated, but I wrote in my own crooked hand. It was evidence. Proof. A record no one could erase. And every time I pressed those papers back under the floorboard, I whispered to myself, "Someday this will matter. Someday someone will know the truth." But Grandpa wasn't done with me. "You'll earn your keep another way," he said one morning, pushing a stack of laundry into my arms. "Neighbors need washing done. You'll work, and the money comes to me." It was humiliating, but in that humiliation came the smallest blessing. For the first time in years, I was allowed beyond the gate. I walked the dirt roads to other people's homes with baskets of laundry on my hip. My legs trembled with weakness, but my eyes drank in every detail. The sunlight on the fields, children chasing each other in yards, women gossiping at the store. I was invisible to them, just the strange granddaughter of Mr. Gerald, but to me it was a taste of the world outside my prison. One afternoon, while collecting clothes from a neighbor, I overheard two women whispering about a girl from another town who had been sold off to a rich farmer. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just happening to me. How many girls were being used like me, silenced like me? That night I couldn't sleep. My scraps of paper under the floorboard weren't just about me anymore. They were about all of us. By 25, the anger inside me was a constant fire. I watched Grandpa grow older, slower though still sharp-eyed. My mother continued thriving in her business, her hair streaked with silver but her dresses finer each year. And me? I was a ghost in my own life. But I had something they didn't know about. I had my records, my memories, my truth. And I had begun to dream. What if one day I left? What if I ran even with nothing? What if I found someone who believed me? The thought scared me, but it also kept me alive. Then came the night that forced everything to change. I was sitting on the porch sewing when I heard voices by the gate. Grandpa was talking to another man, younger this time, maybe in his 30s. My stomach tightened. "No children anymore," Grandpa said gruffly. "She's barren. But she's still pretty enough. Could keep a man happy." I froze. Was he planning to sell me again? This time not as a childbearer, but as property for some man's bed? My heart pounded as I crept back inside. I pressed my hand over the floorboard where my papers lay. My proof. My life. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, one thought consumed me. If I don't act now, I will never be free. I wish I could tell you that by the time I turned 24, my nightmare had ended. That someone noticed. That someone cared enough to knock on our door and ask why a young woman like me never left the house, why her belly kept swelling with children who always disappeared into thin air. But no one came. No one asked. And the silence of the neighborhood became part of my prison. After the birth of my 10th child, my body gave up. The bleeding was so heavy that even my grandfather's confidence wavered. The midwife shouted at him, saying I was going to die if they didn't call a doctor. For the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not for me, but for losing his investment. The doctor who came was well paid and well aware of what he was covering up. He stitched me, gave me medicine, and delivered the verdict. She cannot bear another child. Her uterus is too damaged. If she gets pregnant again, she might die. I thought those words would bring me freedom. Instead, they brought me something worse, uselessness. To my grandfather, I was no longer valuable. I was a broken tool. I'll never forget the way he looked at me after the doctor left, cold, disgusted, as if I had betrayed him by surviving but failing to remain productive. My mother came to the house 2 days later, dressed in a new silk blouse and carrying shopping bags from San Francisco. She barely looked at me lying weak on the bed. Instead, she asked my grandfather in a low voice, "So what now?" As if I were not even in the room. As if my existence had been reduced to an accounting problem. What now? The answer came faster than I imagined. That same evening, my grandfather sat at the kitchen table with a cigarette he didn't smoke, staring at me. "You're done, girl," he said flatly. "No man's gonna pay for a barren cow. You better be useful in another way." Another way. I felt my skin crawl as I realized what he meant. From then on, he no longer sold my body to couples desperate for children. He rented me out to men who wanted something else entirely. Men who didn't care about heirs, only about control, dominance, and pleasure. They came in twos, sometimes drunk, sometimes sober, always cruel. I was no longer a garden for seeds, as they once called me. I was now just flesh for rent. First I fought. I screamed, clawed, begged my mother to intervene. But her eyes, once tired and broken, now carried only resignation. "You think I wanted this life?" she whispered once while handing me a bowl of broth. "You think I had choices?" Her words were sharp, but her hands trembled. It didn't make it easier. It didn't make me forgive her. I learned to go silent, to disconnect from my body, to imagine I was floating above the room, looking down at the girl on the bed who was no longer me. That trick saved me when nothing else could. But even silence has its breaking point. One night, after 2 men left me bruised and half-conscious, I crawled to the loose floorboard under my bed where I kept the scraps of paper. My secret records of the 10 children they had stolen from me. My shaking hands traced the names I had written. Peter, Maria, Samuel, Rosa, the list went on. 10 names, 10 ghosts that gave me strength. That night, for the first time, I whispered to myself, I will not die here. It was a dangerous thought. A seed of rebellion. But once planted, it grew. I began to listen carefully when the men talked. Some mentioned towns, addresses, business deals. I wrote everything down, hiding each note in my secret place. I didn't know exactly why. Maybe one day I would find my children. Maybe one day I would expose these men. The turning point came one afternoon when my grandfather fell asleep drunk in his chair. His pocket knife slid to the floor with a clatter. I stared at it for a long time. I imagined plunging it into his chest, ending his reign of terror once and for all. My fingers even brushed the handle. But I froze. I wasn't ready yet. Instead, I made a decision. I would gather enough courage and enough proof to escape. Not just run, but run with a purpose. To survive wasn't enough anymore. I wanted justice. And justice, I promised myself, would begin with him. The first time I dared to plan my escape, I almost got caught. My grandfather was out drinking with some of his friends, and I thought I had enough time to slip out the back and walk to Jeanette's house, the herb woman who had once whispered to me that what was happening was against God's law. I had hidden a small pouch of coins I had managed to save, mostly tips slipped to me in secret by a man whose conscience wasn't completely dead. It wasn't much, but in my mind it was freedom. I didn't make it halfway down the dirt road before headlights blinded me. His truck pulled up fast, gravel spitting under the tires. He dragged me back by my hair, shouting curses so loud the neighbors must have heard. But no one came out. No one ever came out. That night he tied me to the bedpost with an old belt and left me there until dawn. Try that again, he hissed in my ear, and I'll make sure the sheriff puts you somewhere you'll beg to come back here. I believed him. The sheriff was one of his drinking buddies. For weeks after, I sank into despair. But the fire inside me, once lit, refused to die. I knew I couldn't try to run blindly. I had to be smarter, patient, invisible. So I played my role. I lowered my eyes. I obeyed. I acted broken the way he wanted me. But at night, when the house was quiet, I built my secret world under that floorboard. Lists of names, descriptions of the men, places they mentioned, bits of money, herbs Jeanette had given me wrapped in cloth, and above all, the memories of my children. They were my reason, my anchor. It was during one of those dark nights that I began to pray again. Not the kind of prayers I had whispered as a child, begging God to take away the pain, but something fiercer. If you let me live, I will not waste it. I will fight. I will tell. I will drag their sins into the light. It was a vow whispered into the cracks of the ceiling. Then came the night that changed everything. My grandfather had grown careless. He was older now, slower, drinking more than ever. One of the men he brought over, a local politician, got so drunk that he passed out on the floor. I sat on the edge of the bed watching his chest rise and fall, and I noticed something sticking out of his jacket pocket. A small leather notebook. My heart pounded as I slid it free. Inside were names, dates, addresses, payments. It wasn't just about me, it was about others. I wasn't the only girl. My blood ran cold as I realized this wasn't just my grandfather's scheme. It was a network. A business. I hid that notebook under the floorboard with everything else. For the first time, I felt like I had a weapon. A week later, I overheard my grandfather talking with my mother in the kitchen. His voice was low, but the walls in that old house carried sound. She's getting older. Men don't want her anymore. Maybe it's time we cut our losses. My mother didn't answer right away. Then she said, "What do you mean?" "She's useless now. More trouble than profit. There are ways to make problems disappear." I froze in my bed, every muscle tight with terror. They weren't just going to use me anymore. They were going to get rid of me. That night, staring at the ceiling, I made my decision. I wouldn't wait for them to kill me. I wouldn't die in that house like some discarded tool. I would escape this time for real. And I wouldn't leave empty-handed. I began to prepare. Quietly. Carefully. Each day I tucked away scraps of food, a little water, the money, the notebook. Jeanette had once told me about a bus station 2 towns over, where no one knew my face. I memorized the route. But deep down, I knew running wasn't enough anymore. I wanted something else. Something stronger than survival. I wanted revenge. The night I left that house, the air was heavy with the smell of rain. Every sound made me jump. The creak of the floorboards, the distant bark of a dog, even my own heartbeat pounding so loud I feared it might wake him. My grandfather had passed out in his chair with a bottle of whiskey in his hand, and my mother had long since stopped spending the night there. I knew this was my only chance. I pulled the small bundle from under the floorboard: coins, scraps of food, Jeanette's herbs, and most importantly, the politician's leather notebook. I pressed it to my chest like a shield. Those pages were more than just paper, they were my proof, my power. I slipped barefoot out the back door, the dirt cool under my feet. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I kept my eyes on the horizon, on the road that led away from Bakersfield, away from the prison that had stolen my girlhood. Halfway down the road, headlights cut through the darkness. My stomach dropped. For one horrifying second I thought it was him, that he had woken, that he was coming to drag me back. But the car slowed and I saw it was Jeanette. She leaned out the window, her gray hair blowing in the wind. "Get in, child," she whispered urgently. Now. I didn't ask how she knew. Maybe she had been watching me for weeks. Maybe she had simply guessed the night would come. I climbed in, clutching the bundle to my chest. For the first time in years I let myself breathe. Jeanette didn't take me to her house. Instead, she drove straight through the night to a safe place I never even knew existed. A small shelter run by women, hidden behind the facade of a church. When I stepped inside, I was greeted not with suspicion or judgment, but with warm eyes and gentle hands. They didn't ask for explanations. They didn't look at me like I was broken. They gave me soup, a bed, and silence until I was ready to speak. When I finally told them everything, I expected disbelief. Instead, one of the women reached across the table and took my hand. "You're not the first, Teresa, and you won't be the last. But we're going to make sure they can't hurt anyone else." It was then I opened the notebook. Page after page of names, dates, and payments spilled onto the table. The women exchanged looks of grim recognition. "This is enough to bring them down," one whispered. And so it began. Slowly, carefully, the truth unraveled. The sheriff, the doctor, the politicians, my grandfather, my own mother, all of them tangled in a web of greed and cruelty. The women at the shelter had allies, lawyers, journalists, even federal agents who had been waiting for evidence like this. It wasn't easy. The trials took years. Some of the men slipped away, protected by money and influence. My mother never went to prison, but she lived the rest of her days in shame, abandoned by the very people she thought would protect her. My grandfather wasn't so lucky. He died behind bars, an old man stripped of the power he once wielded like a weapon. And me? I was free. But freedom is complicated when you've lived most of your life in chains. For years I battled nightmares. I woke sweating, convinced I was back in that house, convinced I'd hear his boots on the floor. But slowly, with help, I began to heal. I never stopped looking for my children. Some doors remained closed forever, names sealed by adoption papers I could not break through. But others opened. I found Peter first, the boy who had been born when I was just 13. He was grown, a man with children of his own. He looked at me with confusion at first, then with tears. "All these years I wondered," he said, voice trembling. "Now I know. Not all reunions were happy. Some of my children didn't want to know me, and I had to learn to accept that too. But each face I saw, each story I heard, stitched another torn piece of my heart. Now, as I sit here on this porch at 68, with the cicadas singing in the maple tree, I realize I kept my vow. I survived. I told. I dragged their sins into the light. And those scars still run deep inside me. I am no longer just merchandise. I am a woman, a mother, a survivor. And to every young girl who might be listening, to every woman who still feels trapped in silence, you are not alone. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And no matter how dark it seems, there is always a way out. Even if you have to build it yourself. This is my truth, my burden, and my victory. So if you're still here with me, thank you. Thank you for listening, for witnessing, for carrying a piece of my story with you. Because that means I did not suffer in vain. And maybe, just maybe, it means the next little girl won't have to suffer the same.